Hey all, this video will look at whether the gaming performance of Ryzen CPUs are affected by memory clock speed when the real memory latency remains constant. And by real memory latency remaining constant, I mean the real memory latency in nanoseconds. It will also look at the impact of tighter latency timings on gaming performance as a secondary subject. So just to cover off what is meant by real latency. Most memory timings are expressed as a combination of clock speed, e.g. 3200 MHz, and latency as a multiple of clock speed, e.g. 3200 C14. Now latency relates to the time it takes to retrieve a word of memory or a request from memory from the memory banks in your PC to your CPU. For example, the memory speed of 3200 C16 is memory that runs at 3200 MHz and has a timing of 16 clock cycles. The real latency can be calculated as 1 divided by 3.2 billion times 16, which means the latency is 5 nanoseconds. FYI, 1 nanosecond is 1 billionth of a second, so this is very quick. As mentioned previously, this video will explore the impact of varying the RAM clock speed whilst leaving the real latency fixed, or as fixed as possible. I will also look at one sample of reduced latency to show the impacts of this change, but this is not the primary purpose of this video. So just to cover off the actual timings I'll be using during this video, the lines you see here in green are the timings where I've tried to keep the real latency in nanoseconds consistent. So you can see I'm doing 3200 C16, which has a real latency of 5, as does 280014 and 240012. And finally, the memory speed of 1866/9 has a real latency of 4.8 nanoseconds, but that's the closest I could get to 5 nanoseconds using the lowest clock speed that my motherboard would allow. For the quicker latency timing, I'm going to be using 3214, which has a real latency of 4.4 nanoseconds highlighted in blue. So just to cover off the test bench specifications I'll be using, I'm going to use a Ryzen 5 2600X. I'll be using an AsRock Fatality X370 Gaming X motherboard. I'm using RAM with a minimum timing of 3200 C14. I'm going to be using Samsung 840 EVO 500 Gigabyte hard drive. You can see the games I'll be running through today listed there. And just to let you know that the ambient temperature that I ran the test under was about 17 to 18 degrees Celsius. So now I'm going to run you through all the results of the bench testing that I've performed, and at the end I'll probably try to draw a few conclusions for you. So first up is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six in 720p on the very high preset. So as you can see, there's a definite improvement when you fix the nanosecond latency timing and increase the clock speed. So even though, for example, the 3200 megahertz memory has a latency of 5 nanoseconds, it's much faster than the 1866 memory with a latency of 4.8 seconds. And this holds true for both the 1% lows and the average FPS. And there's also an improvement in the speed when you reduce the latency to 3214. So moving on to World of Tanks now. Again, very similar story. But what you can see also is most of the improvement in this particular title is gained when you overclock the 2400 RAM. So if you've got 2400 C14 at home and you can get your RAM to say 2800 C14 or even 2933 C14, you would probably see all the benefit that you're going to see on the Ryzen platform of overclocking your RAM in terms of the actual speed of the clock speed. And again, another jump when you reduce the actual latency itself. Over to Assassin's Creed Odyssey in 1080p on the low preset. Bit of a story emerging here. The 2800 C14 seems to be the sweet spot. So again, if you've got 2400 C14 and you can overclock it to 2400 or to 2933 C14, you would be seeing a big benefit in your response time. If we look at the 1% lows, it's again a similar story. Not spending too much time here, but again, every single game we're reviewing so far has had a significant improvement in the average FPS and 1% lows when you increase the memory clock speed. FarCry 5 720p, same story, big benefit going up to 2800 megahertz in both the average FPS, but especially in the 1% lows, where there wasn't even really a benefit of going to 3200 until you actually reduce the latency of the memory itself. CSGO 720p low preset. The 1% lows here are probably just to be ignored, because when you go through the smoke, I don't know if everybody knows this particular game and its inbuilt benchmark. When you go through the smoke, it pretty much kills off, it pretty much sets your 1% lows to whatever your GPU can do through that smoke. But as you can see, the effect on the average FPS is similar to the other games. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, probably didn't see as big a benefit here as actually increasing the memory clock speed had on some of the other games. Obviously there was an obvious improvement going from 1866 to 2400, but then it slowed down a lot, and then there was a significant improvement, almost 10 FPS improvement in the 1% lows when you actually went to 3200 C14. But this does seem to be peculiar to this particular title, in a big increase as opposed to another incremental increase when you reduce the actual latency. So overall, the results are in, and I think we can conclude from this that for a fixed latency speed of 5 nanoseconds, which we chose to use here, increasing the clock speed does in fact improve your gaming performance. So what can we conclude from this? So I think we conclude that increasing your RAM clock speed gives you a performance boost even when you keep the real latency consistent. This is due to your chip's memory controller taking advantage of improved data transfer rates, which you can look up on the internet. Note, there's a lot of misinformation out there that tells you your RAM will only be faster if the real latency is reduced, which is obviously incorrect. Notice that the 1866 C9 timings has a lower real latency than the 2400 C14 timing, 8.4 nanoseconds versus 5 nanoseconds respectively, but the 2400 C14 RAM performs significantly better. This is due to data throughput advantages of the higher clock RAM being more important than the 3% or so latency disadvantage. Also, if you currently have 2400 C14 memory, it's probably just worth downloading the Ryzen memory calculator and seeing if you can overclock to say 2800 C14 or 2933 C14 before worrying about new RAM, like I did, like a silly man. I'm definitely regretting that purchase after this video. If you took the $170 you saved from not buying that RAM and put it into a GPU, that'd be a much better option to up your FPS. So, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. If you'd like to see any of my other videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. And oh yeah, if you've got any feedback, please leave it in the comments below.